Hey everyone, I'm Elena, 30 now, but this story takes me way back. I've mulled over sharing it countless times because it's a tangled mess of emotions and events that defined my life. But the more I think about it, the more I realize how much I needed to unpack this, not just for myself, but for anyone else who's been in my shoes. It started when I was 12. My dad was my rock, always dependable, always present. That morning, everything seemed normal. Dad ruffled my hair as I sleepily ate my breakfast. "Morning, Ellie. Ready for school?" he asked, his voice warm. "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled. My mom, Jen, barely glanced up from her tablet. Dad kissed her cheek and said, "See you later, Jen." But all she muttered was, "Uh-huh." They hadn't been talking much lately. It felt like they were living in two different worlds. Before heading out, Dad smiled at me. "Dinner's on me Friday. You pick the place." I grinned, already imagining my favorite pizza spot. That was the last time I saw him. The day dragged on, normal and uneventful. Then, during my last class, the principal came to pull me out. When I walked into her office, Mom was already there, sitting stiffly. She wasn't crying, just clutching a tissue in her hand. "Elena," she said, her voice flat, "your dad passed away today." I froze, the words not sinking in. "What?" was all I could manage. She sighed, as if explaining was a burden. "He collapsed at work. They think it was a heart attack." My dad was only 43, healthy, strong, and full of life. It didn't make sense. He wasn't supposed to just not be here anymore. That night, the house was eerily quiet. I wandered downstairs for water and overheard Mom on the phone. I stopped in the hallway, listening as she spoke to her friend Marlene. "Honestly, Marlene," she said, her voice shockingly light, "this might be a blessing in disguise. Being a widow is so much easier than going through a messy divorce." I clamped my hand over my mouth, my stomach twisting. Now I don't have to deal with lawyers or splitting assets. The house is mine. The savings are mine. I'll just play the grieving widow for a while. It's not like anyone will question it. She laughed. My dad wasn't even in the ground yet, and she was treating his death like a convenient escape. The funeral was a blur. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue occasionally, playing her role as the devastated widow. But her performance didn't fool Aunt Marcy, who hugged me tightly after the service. "You're going to be okay, Ellie," she whispered. "You're stronger than you know." I wanted to believe her, but the house felt like a ghost town. Mom wasn't just distant, she was dismissive. "You look just like him," she snapped one day. "No wonder you're so awkward." She dove headfirst into moving forward, clearing out Dad's clothes, redecorating the house and erasing every trace of him. It felt like she was trying to rewrite history, and I was just another leftover from the life she wanted to forget. 3 months after Dad's passing, Mom dropped a bombshell at dinner. "I've been seeing someone," she said casually, not even looking up from her plate. "What?" I blurted out. "I met someone at work. His name is Mark. He's stable and kind. You'll like him." It had only been 3 months. How could she move on so quickly? But it wasn't up for discussion. A few weeks later, Mark started joining us for dinner. He was polite, but distant, like he didn't know how to interact with me, or didn't care to try. Things escalated quickly. One evening, Mom beamed as she announced, "Mark and I are getting married." I forced a smile, my heart sinking. It didn't matter what I thought. She had already decided. The wedding was a small affair, and soon after, Mark and his 2 kids, Bryce and Olivia, moved into our house. That's when everything really changed. Mom bent over backward to make them feel at home. New clothes, redecorated rooms, and fancy meals. Meanwhile, I got hand-me-downs and cold indifference. "I've done enough for you," she said when I asked for anything. "Why don't you try earning your keep for once?" Bryce and Olivia, both close to my age, were worlds apart from me. Bryce, 14, claimed the second-largest bedroom without a second thought, while Olivia, 13, turned my art corner into her creative studio. Mom didn't even ask how I felt. "We need to make them feel welcome," she said. "Don't be selfish, Elena." I wasn't trying to be selfish. I just wanted to feel like I still mattered. By the time junior year started, I had one goal: get out. College became my escape plan. I threw myself into school, stacking my schedule with extracurriculars and keeping my grades high. I worked on applications in secret, knowing Mom wouldn't support me. One night, I brought up college at dinner. "I've been looking at schools," I said cautiously. "I want to study business and marketing." The room went silent. Then Mom said, "We can't afford to send you to college. What about Dad's savings?" I asked, my voice trembling. "That money's gone," she said flatly. "Do you think raising you was free?" I stared at her, stunned. She had spent years talking about how Dad had set aside money for my future. Now she was acting like it never existed. Later that night, I called Aunt Marcy, tears streaming down my face as I told her everything. "Your dad would be furious if he knew what she was doing," Marcy said firmly. "Come over tomorrow. We'll figure this out." The next evening, I went to Aunt Marcy's house, my bag heavy with books and emotions I couldn't unpack. She met me at the door with her usual warmth, pulling me into a hug before ushering me inside. "Tea's on the table," she said, her voice soft but steady. As I sat down, she slid a thick envelope across the table. "Open it," she said. I hesitated, staring at the envelope like it might bite. Slowly, I peeled it open and pulled out a stack of papers, bank statements, all with my name on them. My hands shook as I flipped through them. "Your dad gave me this account 2 weeks before he passed," Marcy explained. "He was worried your mom would spend it on herself, so he made me promise to keep it safe until you needed it. For college." I stared at her, my throat tight. "He saved this for me?" She nodded. "It's not a fortune, but it's enough to get you started. You don't have to rely on her for anything." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. I clutched the papers like a lifeline, holding back tears as Marcy reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've always been stronger than you realize," she said. "Now it's time to prove it." I didn't say a word about the account at home. The less Mom knew, the better. Bryce and Olivia, of course, kept their usual antics going. Bryce smirked at me one afternoon and said, "The diner downtown is hiring. Maybe you can wash dishes after graduation." Olivia chimed in. "If you're lucky, they might let you clean the bathrooms, too." I ignored them, pretending their words didn't bother me. Inside, though, I was seething. They had no idea what I was planning, and I intended to keep it that way. The day I received my acceptance letter to State University, I could hardly contain my excitement. It was one of the top business schools in the region, and between scholarships and Dad's savings, I could afford it. I told Marcy first, showing her the letter with shaking hands. "I knew you could do it," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Your dad would be so proud of you." At home, I kept the news to myself. Mom didn't ask about my plans, and I didn't offer any details. Letting her in felt like handing her a weapon she could use against me. Graduation day came faster than I expected. The ceremony was supposed to be a celebration, a milestone marking the start of a new chapter. But of course, Mom and Mark managed to cast a shadow over it. After the ceremony, as everyone else was taking pictures and hugging their families, Mom and Mark pulled me aside. Their faces were set in a way that told me this wasn't going to be good. "You're 18 now, Elena," Mark started, his tone patronizing. "We've been more than generous, but it's time for you to start thinking about your next steps." Mom nodded. "You'll need to find a job and figure out where you'll be living. You can't stay here forever." Their words stung, but I kept my expression calm. "I'll be moved out by next week," I said, forcing a small smile. They looked taken aback, probably expecting me to argue or beg. Mark managed to stammer, "Well, good. That's very mature of you." I didn't let their dismissal get to me. Instead, I scanned the crowd until I found Marcy, who opened her arms the moment she saw me. As I melted into her embrace, she whispered, "You did it, kiddo. You're going to do amazing things." This wasn't just graduation day. It was my freedom day. The week flew by as I packed my things in secret. On the day I left, the house was empty. Marcy came to pick me up, her little car a beacon of hope. I loaded everything into the back and stood in the driveway for a moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. "Are you ready?" Marcy asked, watching me carefully. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." We drove to the apartment near campus that I'd arranged with Marcy's help. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. Thanks to scholarships and Dad's savings, I could afford rent, tuition, and even a little extra for groceries. Marcy stayed to help me unpack, giving me advice on everything from budgeting to meal prep. As I stood in my tiny kitchen that evening, surrounded by the quiet of my new space, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I could breathe. The next few months were a whirlwind. Between classes, a part-time job at a cafe, and an internship at a small marketing firm, I barely had time to think about home. It felt like stepping into a new world, one where I could finally focus on building a future for myself. My internship turned out to be a turning point. My boss, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Linda, pulled me aside one afternoon after a client meeting. "Elena," she said, "you've got a knack for this. Stick with it and you'll go far." Hearing that from someone outside my family was a validation I didn't realize I needed. For so long, I'd been told I wasn't enough, that I didn't have potential. Now someone believed in me, and it wasn't out of obligation. By senior year, I had worked my way up to a junior account manager role at the marketing firm while maintaining my grades. My confidence was finally catching up with my ambition. Graduation felt like a dream, a long-awaited milestone that symbolized more than just academic success. It was proof that I could rise above everything life had thrown at me. Marcy was there, cheering louder than anyone, her pride radiating as she snapped photos. She hugged me tight after the ceremony and said, "Your dad would be bursting with pride right now." I smiled, her words warm and comforting. This wasn't just my achievement. It was a testament to the faith Marcy and my dad had placed in me. After graduation, I landed a full-time position at the same marketing firm. The job was intense but rewarding. Late nights and high-pressure deadlines became routine, but I didn't mind. Every challenge I overcame felt like a step further away from my past. I was finally building the life I'd always wanted. The first bonus I earned went toward upgrading my old Honda Civic to a sleek black Mercedes I'd dreamed about since college. Driving it for the first time, I felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of everything I had achieved on my own. I moved into a downtown condo shortly after, a space that felt like mine in every sense of the word. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the living room in sunlight and a tiny balcony where I could sip coffee and watch the city buzz below. It was quiet, peaceful, a far cry from the chaos of my childhood home. Life wasn't just work and success, though. I made friends, including Kayla, my bubbly college roommate who remained my closest confidant. We'd spend weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants and laughing over glasses of wine. For the first time, I felt like I had a support system outside of Marcy. One evening, while sitting on the balcony with Kayla, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about your family?" The question caught me off guard. I took a sip of wine, buying time to gather my thoughts. "Not often," I admitted. "It's not that I don't care. I just don't miss them." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes family isn't the people we're born into. It's the ones who show up when it matters." Her words stuck with me long after she left that night. Things at work continued to climb. One day, my boss called me into her office. I walked in, notebook in hand, ready for another project review. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk with my name on it. "Elena, we've been watching your work. The board agrees. It's time." I blinked, unsure of what she meant, until she added, "We're promoting you to Senior Marketing Director. Congratulations." I opened the folder, my eyes landing on the offer letter. My heart raced as I read the details. The salary was more than I'd ever imagined, and the perks were incredible. I tried to stay composed, but inside I was beaming. This wasn't just a promotion. It was validation. All those years of struggling, fighting to prove my worth, had led to this moment. I had done it, without my mom, without Mark, without anyone who doubted me. That night, I treated myself to dinner at a high-end restaurant. Sitting alone at the table, savoring every bite of my meal, I reflected on how far I'd come. This was my life, a life I had built with my own hands, free from the weight of anyone else's expectations. But as much as I tried to leave the past behind, it had a way of creeping back in. One evening, while scrolling through social media, a message popped up from an account I hadn't interacted with in years. My mom. The message was short, but brimming with her signature entitlement. "Elena, it's your mother. My 53rd birthday is coming up, and I'm hosting a celebration at Le Chateau. You'll attend, won't you? It's on the 12th at 7 p.m. Don't be late and don't embarrass me." I stared at the screen, rereading the message. The audacity. After years of silence, she had the nerve to summon me like nothing had happened. I debated ignoring her, but a part of me, the part that still carried the hurt, wanted to confront her. I called Marcy the next day. "She messaged me," I said, as soon as she answered. Your mother? Marcy asked, her tone skeptical. Yeah, she wants me to come to her birthday dinner. There was a pause. Are you going? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to block her and move on, but another part wants to show up. Not for her, but for me. Marcy sighed. If you decide to go, make sure it's on your terms, not hers. Her words stayed with me as I wrestled with the decision. In the end, I decided to go. Not to rekindle anything, but to prove to myself that I wasn't the scared, voiceless girl I used to be. The day of the dinner, I left work early to get ready. I chose a simple yet elegant Chanel black dress and paired it with heels. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about reminding myself of how far I'd come. When I arrived at Le Chateau, the hostess led me to a private room filled with familiar faces. Mom was at the head of the table, sparkling in a sequined dress. Mark was next to her, looking older but just as smug. Bryce and Olivia flanked them, laughing at something as they sipped sparkling water. Elena, Mom said when she saw me, her eyes scanning my dress with thinly veiled disdain. You're late. It's 7:02, I replied evenly, taking a seat at the far end of the table. The evening went exactly as I expected. Mom basked in attention, bragging about Bryce's soccer trophies and Olivia's latest art showcase. Not once did she acknowledge my presence or accomplishments. When it was time to open gifts, I handed her a small, neatly wrapped box. She eyed it suspiciously, then laughed. Is this all? She said, her tone dripping with condescension. A last-minute effort to keep up? I smiled politely. Open it and see. She tore the wrapping paper, revealing an elegant velvet box. Inside was a simple card and a receipt for a luxury vacation package worth more than anything on that table. Her face turned red as she read it. You can't afford this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I tilted my head. You'd know if you'd kept up with my life. But you didn't. The room fell silent as I stood up. Enjoy the coffee machine, Mom, I said, my voice calm but firm. Hopefully it keeps you awake at night thinking about what you've missed. And with that, I walked out, leaving the stunned silence behind. The sound of my heels echoed as I left the restaurant, each step feeling like a weight lifting off my chest. By the time I reached the taxi waiting at the curb, I wasn't angry or sad, just relieved. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was a moment of clarity. My mom hadn't changed, and she never would, and that was fine because I didn't need her to. When I got home, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the couch, still in my dress. The weight of the evening caught up to me, and I let out a deep breath. I wasn't dwelling on what had been said or done. I was simply basking in the knowledge that I had stood my ground. I'd shown her, and everyone in that room, that I wasn't the same girl they once overlooked. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Most were from my mom, though a few came from numbers I didn't recognize. Elena, we need to talk. Call me. You can't just walk out like that. I'm your mother. You owe me a conversation. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The version of me who would have scrambled to explain herself or appease her was long gone. Instead, I called Marcy and filled her in on the night. She didn't even open the gift at first, I said, laughing. When she did, her face turned as red as the wine on the table. Marcy chuckled. Serves her right. So, how do you feel about it all? I feel free, I admitted. It's like I closed a door I'd been afraid to shut for years, and now you can keep moving forward, she said, her tone warm and proud. Over the next few weeks, my mom didn't stop trying to reach me. Her messages grew more desperate. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Bryce and Olivia think you're selfish. Is that what you want? Elena, please, let's start over. But I didn't take the bait. Her apologies weren't about fixing things. They were about regaining control. I'd spent my whole life living under her expectations, and I wasn't going back. Eventually, the messages slowed, then stopped altogether. The silence was a relief. With that chapter of my life firmly closed, I focused on the present. Work was thriving. My friendships were strong, and I was finally planning the solo trip to Italy I'd dreamed about for years. Marcy, of course, insisted on helping me plan every detail. You'll need good walking shoes, she said over tea one evening, and make sure to take plenty of photos. I want to see everything when you get back. I smiled, her excitement infectious. You know, I could always bring you with me. She shook her head. "Oh no, this trip is for you. Besides," she added with a sly smile, "I have my own getaway coming up." I laughed, remembering the vacation package I'd gifted her after the dinner. It felt good to give back to the one person who had always been there for me. By the time I boarded the plane to Italy, I felt lighter than I had in years. The trip was everything I'd hoped for: stunning views, incredible food, and a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. I wandered through ancient streets, stood in awe of centuries-old art, and sipped espresso in quiet cafes, soaking in every moment. But it wasn't just the beauty of Italy that left an impression. It was the realization that I had finally built a life that was mine, a life where I called the shots, where I could celebrate my wins and learn from my losses without anyone diminishing them. When I returned home, I found a letter waiting for me in my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakably my mom's. I debated throwing it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a short note. "Elena, I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't undo the past, but I hope it's not too late to fix things. Please call me, Mom." I stared at the note for a long time, unsure how to feel. It wasn't the first time she'd said sorry, but it was the first time it felt different. There was no entitlement in her words, no demand for me to respond, just a simple, almost hesitant request. Still, I wasn't ready to reopen that door. Maybe someday I'd call her, maybe I wouldn't. Either way, I knew my worth now. Whether or not she ever truly saw it didn't matter anymore. These days, my life is full in the best way. Work continues to challenge and inspire me. My friends are my chosen family, and Marcy remains my rock. The scars from my childhood are still there, but they've faded, reminders of how far I've come. And when I think about my mom, it's not with anger or sadness anymore. It's with acceptance. She made her choices, and I made mine. I chose to rise above, to build a life filled with love, respect, and self-worth. That's the life my dad would have wanted for me. That's the life I've earned. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful. Story 2. Growing up, I thought I understood what family meant. My dad, Grant, raised me and my older brother Nate after Mom passed away when I was 10. Nate was 25, 8 years older than me, and he was my role model, my confidant, and the one person I thought I could always rely on. Dad did everything he could to hold us together after Mom died. He taught us the value of loyalty, honesty, and respect, and he often said, "If you ever cheat or betray someone you care about, don't expect me to stand by you." Those words stuck with me, and I thought Nate lived by them too. At 17, I was head over heels for my girlfriend, Paige. We'd been together for a year, and I was convinced she was the one. She fit into my life perfectly, coming over for family dinners, getting along with Dad, and even bonding with Nate. Back then, I thought it was great that they got along so well. I never imagined there was anything to worry about. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual after my track coach cut practice short. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed Nate's car parked outside. That was odd. He usually wasn't home at this time. I figured he must have taken the day off. I walked in, tossed my bag down, and headed to the kitchen to grab a snack. I was about to call Paige and ask if she wanted to hang out when I heard voices upstairs, Nate's voice and Paige's. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe they were hanging out, talking about something. But as I climbed the stairs, their laughter reached me, and something felt off. It wasn't casual laughter. It was the kind of laughter that's private, intimate. I froze halfway up the stairs, my heart pounding. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept up the rest of the way and pushed my bedroom door open. That's when I saw them, Nate and Paige, on my bed. The shock hit me like a truck. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Paige scrambled to cover herself while Nate just sat there, his face frozen with guilt. My world cracked wide open in that moment. "What the hell is this?" I shouted. They both started stammering over each other, offering pathetic excuses. Nate mumbled something about how they didn't mean for this to happen, and Paige kept saying, "We didn't plan this. It just happened." I couldn't believe my ears. How could they even try to justify this? "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I yelled. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, and you didn't mean for this to happen?" I told them both to get out of my room and out of my life. Paige begged me to talk it out, but there was nothing left to say. Nate tried to explain, but I cut him off. The bond we'd had as brothers was gone. I couldn't even look at him. I left the house to clear my head, wandering aimlessly for hours. When I finally went back, Dad was in the kitchen. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. He asked what happened, and the whole story came pouring out. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him exactly what I saw, how Nate betrayed me, and how Paige was just as guilty. As I talked, I watched Dad's face darken with anger. He called Nate down, his voice booming through the house. Nate appeared in the kitchen, looking sheepish and avoiding eye contact. Dad didn't waste any time. "How could you do this to your brother?" he yelled. "After everything we've been through, after everything I taught you, you go and do this?" Nate tried to defend himself, saying it was complicated, that he didn't mean to hurt me, but Dad wasn't having it. "You made your choice, Nate," Dad said, his voice cold, "and now you'll deal with the consequences. Pack your things. You're out." I stood there silent, as Nate tried to plead with Dad, but it was no use. Dad was resolute. He told Nate to leave, and for the first time, I felt like someone had my back. Nate packed his things and walked out that night, pausing at the door to say, "If this is how it's going to be, then I'm done with this family." When the door slammed shut, I felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. Nate was gone, and our family was shattered. Dad put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did nothing wrong. This is on him." But it didn't feel that way. The house felt emptier without Nate, and the betrayal left a scar that wouldn't heal anytime soon. Life moved on, but it was never the same. Dad and I tried to adjust, but the weight of what happened lingered. We never spoke about Nate again, and for a while, it felt like we were just surviving, not living. But things took a turn when Dad fell ill. 2 years after Nate left, life had settled into a new, quieter normal. Dad and I worked as a team to keep things afloat. We never spoke about Nate, and honestly, I didn't miss him much. The pain of his betrayal was too fresh, and the trust between us felt irreparably broken. Dad, ever the stoic, threw himself into work, while I focused on school and trying to move forward. Then came the news that flipped our world upside down again. Dad started feeling tired all the time. At first, we thought it was just the stress of work, but when he started losing weight and getting sick more often, he finally went to the doctor. The diagnosis hit us like a sledgehammer: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors were blunt. There wasn't much they could do aside from managing the symptoms. Dad, true to his nature, put on a brave face, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He sat me down one night after the diagnosis, his voice steady but softer than usual. "Evan," he said, using my name like it carried weight. "We've been through a lot, you and me. I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I said, already choking up. "Promise me you'll keep moving forward, no matter what happens. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and I need to know you'll be okay when I'm gone." I wanted to tell him not to talk like that, to fight harder, to hope for a miracle, but I didn't. I nodded and said, "I promise." The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I juggled school, 2 part-time jobs, and caring for Dad. Our days were filled with doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and quiet evenings watching old movies together. He'd crack jokes like he always did, even when the pain was visible in his face. One night, not long before the end, he pulled me aside again. "I've taken care of everything," he said. "When I'm gone, you won't have to worry about anything." I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but I nodded anyway, not trusting myself to speak. Dad passed away peacefully a few weeks later. I was there, holding his hand, and I'll never forget the way his grip loosened as he slipped away. It was the most peaceful and heartbreaking moment of my life. The funeral was a blur. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers came to pay their respects, all of them telling me what a great man Dad was. And they were right. He was. But there was one glaring absence: Nate. He didn't show up, didn't call, didn't send a message. Nothing. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. No matter what he'd done, this was his dad too. I tried not to dwell on it, but it was hard not to feel like he'd abandoned us all over again. A few weeks after the funeral, I met with Dad's lawyer to go over the will. I didn't expect much. Between the medical bills and our modest lifestyle, I figured there wouldn't be much left. But as the lawyer read through the details, I was stunned. Dad had planned everything meticulously. He'd managed to save more money than I ever imagined. and he left almost all of it to me, along with the house, his car, and a few other assets. Then came the twist. The lawyer explained that Dad had left Nate a small sum of money, just enough to make it legally binding and prevent him from contesting the will. The amount was laughably small compared to the rest of the inheritance. It was a final, unmistakable message. Nate had made his choices, and Dad wasn't about to reward him for them. I sat there, processing it all. On one hand, I felt vindicated. Dad had my back, even in death. On the other hand, it felt so final. It was as if Dad had closed the door on Nate for good. Our aunt, who was there with me, put a hand on my shoulder. "Your dad wanted to make sure you were taken care of," she said softly. "He was so proud of you." I nodded, holding back tears. I felt the weight of the responsibility he'd entrusted to me, but also the aching void of knowing he was gone. Not long after, Nate resurfaced. It started with a text. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, torn between ignoring him and hearing him out. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked older, worn down, like life had hit him harder than he'd expected. "Evan," he started, his voice awkward and hesitant. "I heard about Dad. I'm sorry." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I wasn't about to make this easy for him. "I know I wasn't there," he continued. "I know I messed up, but I heard about the inheritance." There it was, the real reason he wanted to talk. "I think it's unfair," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I'm still his son, too. Don't you think I deserve something?" The nerve of him. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "Unfair. You think you deserve something after walking out on us? After not even showing up when Dad was dying? You think you're entitled to what he left me?" "Look," he said, holding up his hands defensively. "I know I screwed up, but I'm struggling, man. I just need a little help." "Help?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You've got some nerve, Nate. Dad gave you every chance to make things right, and you threw it all away. And now you're here because you want money. You didn't even come to his funeral." He flinched, but didn't back down. "It's not like that. I thought we could start over." I shook my head, anger and sadness swirling inside me. "Starting over doesn't mean you get to erase everything you did. Dad left me what he did for a reason. If you want to fix things, it starts with owning up to what you did, not asking for money." Nate sat there, silent for a moment. Then he stood up, pushing his chair back. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "If that's how it's going to be, then I guess we're done here." He walked out, leaving me sitting there staring at the empty chair. Part of me wanted to chase after him, to try one last time to fix what was broken, but the bigger part of me knew it was pointless. Nate wasn't ready to take responsibility, and I wasn't about to let him drag me down again. It's been months since that day, and I haven't heard from Nate since. I've started building a new life, one that doesn't revolve around old wounds and broken family ties. I still think about Dad every day, and I try to honor his memory by living the way he taught me, honestly, with loyalty and respect. As for Nate, I don't know if we'll ever mend things. Maybe someday he'll understand the damage he caused and try to make it right. Until then, I've made my peace. Some doors are better left closed.